Sorry, it seems like I've muted myself. Have we been up here this whole time and I've been chatting on my own?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I am so sorry about that. Thank you
No
so
worries.
much. I got a message from a colleague. Okay, let's restart. Everyone, welcome. My name is Tala. I'm head of capability development at Cosmic Centaurs, and I have been on mute for 3 minutes talking to myself. I'm very delighted to have Russell with us for this conversation. Russell, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Lovely to be with you.
Yes, I wondered earlier. I was like, Russell, I thanked you for joining us, and I got no response, but it's on me. So, if you don't know who we are, Cosmic Centaurs is an organizational and leadership development consulting firm. We partner with leaders to make better decisions about work and the workplace, and we affect sustainable change. I always say we're not the consultants who just do slides, we roll up our sleeves and dive in. Today's session is the second in our capability-centered conversations. We're here to bring thought leaders, much like Russell. We had Dr. Molly last time. We want to talk about what it means and how learning and work is changing. How do we build capability and skills for the future? And today's discussion is extremely poignant because AI has accelerated the pace of so much. And so if you're curious about how AI is going to be changing the way in which we learn in the workforce, then this session is for you, whether you're an L&D leader, someone in people and culture, or an executive who's just grappling with this question. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce Russell for the second time, but with sound today. Russell is the CEO and founder of Elham Studio and Almach AI. He spent the last 2 decades building innovative learning models across the world. And when I say the world, I mean it. If you've read his book, you know that he has literally been across all continents. And your journey, Russell, began in Buenos Aires, where you've worked across more than 20 countries since. Along the way, leading Think Global School, the world's first traveling high school, which is super cool, where students learn through immersive place-based projects and co-creating the award-winning TGS Changemaker curriculum. In Dubai, today you're leading Elham Studio, where you partner with foundations, schools, and learning innovators across 5 continents, so not limited to the region, to redesign how we learn in a fast-changing, very imperfect system that we operate in. With Almach AI, Russell's bringing that same philosophy into adaptive AI-enabled learning pathways that evolve with the world of work. And Russell's an author, and actually I have his book right here. This time I'll share it. The Firefly Effect has only been out for a few months. It's already an Amazon bestseller. I have read it. It is amazing. I'm really looking forward to unpacking it. And so, Russell, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Lovely to be with you.
Yeah, we're really excited for this conversation. Just a little bit more about the introduction, and then we can really dive into it. There's really no shortage of things we could talk about. And I posted this thing to say that, reading this book, I've been grappling with, like, what school do I pick for my kids? And while that's such an interesting conversation, we're really here today to focus on AI as a system breaker has forced us to rethink how we learn. And the way in which we learn in the world of work is no different. So we're all asking this question, is AI going to take over our jobs? What I love about your book is you answer that in the first few pages. You say, yeah, it's going to take over a lot of our work. And the question now is, what are we going to focus on? And I love that premise, and I can't wait to talk more about it. But those uniquely human qualities is what I'm so looking forward to kind of really diving into, because AI has changed how we work. I myself have outsourced crazy amounts of administrative work and copywriting to it. And so the data shows it too. I mean, 75% of knowledge workers use generative AI on the job, 78% have their own tools. And so these workflows, they're changing, and they're also changing how we learn, because information is more accessible than it's ever been, right? Like, it's democratized it, and knowledge is instant, abundant, and in some ways personalized. And so how do we design learning systems in such a way that allows us to make sense of this? And what are those human capabilities we should focus on? So we see companies all the time focus on older learning models. And in your book, you talk about schools that have these older learning models that, prioritize, things that are no longer relevant in today's day and age. So, I think we're really looking forward to talking about some of those contexts. And today's conversation is super timely. AI is going to reshape our roles. And we want to talk about what are those capabilities that are going to be future-proofing our workforce. So with that, I'm really excited to maybe hand the mic over to you, Russell. If anybody in the audience is interested in asking questions, we really invite you and welcome you to drop the questions on LinkedIn Live. We will be sharing this webinar, and we'll do our best to get all of those answers over. So with that, Russell, maybe we can start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about this remarkable journey you've been on, and what are those key chapters that shaped what brought you into this, nature and line of work that you're in today?
Yeah, of course. I was pretty conventional teacher in my early 20s in Manchester in the UK. I trained as a teacher, worked in the college section, which in the UK is between 16 and 18. Taught in a inner city school, which was actually my old college, funnily enough. So I actually went back to where I was a student, and I wanted to give back to kids who were kind of like me, because it was a tough area, it was a tough upbringing, but the college was good. The college was a really good college. And then, I've told this story a few times on various keynotes and podcasts, but I was given the job of Think Global School in the form of a job advertisement, and 3 different people who all didn't know each other kind of put it in front of me on the same day. Wow. And I remember thinking, they either want me gone or they think this is a really good job for me. Anyway, I applied for it, and yeah, as you said in the intro, kind of 8 months later, I was on a plane to Buenos Aires to join in its 3rd year of existence. It'd been in existence since 2010, and I joined in 2012 Think Global School, which was the world's first traveling school. So, my mother thought I was absolutely nuts. She thought I'd lost the plot. There's a few tears, like, okay, you've given up. And I kind of did sacrifice everything back in the UK. But I just remember thinking this was a chance that probably isn't going to come around again. A school like this in its infancy, as it's forming and beginning to shape itself. And I could play some little role in that, which obviously 2012, you kind of didn't. Education wasn't seeing models like Think Global School very much. They were very much an outlier. As I've said many times, it was very hard. There was a lot of naysayers. There was a lot of insults thrown our way about this new style of education we were creating. But yeah, it was an incredible 12-year journey. But that was it. It was a job advert in a paper in an inner city Manchester school, and went through the job application process, jumped on a flight to Buenos Aires. And as you said in the intro, 20 countries or however many countries later, I'm sat here living in Dubai.
Love it. Thank you so much for that. I mean, what an amazing opportunity. I think a traveling school is such a compelling concept, and I can only imagine how much fire you came under, especially from people who are like, this is not what school is. Like, you must be in a classroom. You must, have a chalkboard in front of you. One thing that I think stood out to me in the book, and it's so remarkable, is a lot of your work led you to not just classrooms in other countries, but to countries that had systems that were being built, that, also a lot of indigenous communities. You have amazing stories in your book. And I'd love to know, I mean, there's so much wisdom that comes out of those contexts, and yet the book explores AI. Can you tell us about kind of how your learnings as a teacher, how you studied the way in which people learn, how the indigenous learning stories kind of came to shape your perspective on what is in the Firefly Effect, which is now a new lens of looking at how we learn with the ultimate system breaker?
Yeah, I think, when we went to places like Peru, and I was 6 months in the Sacred Valley, I think of Botswana in the Okavango Delta, we went to these places, and what became very apparent is culture, rituals, were such an anchor to these cultures and community. And I think often we talk about in the conversation with AI about keeping humans in the loop, or how important humans are, but we do a really bad job at explaining what actually that is. I don't think we can just say, and I cite it back to kind of chapter 2 in the book, which I talk a lot about the idea of kayfabe, and we've had this reimagination movement for so long now in education. And I argue that it's getting quite damaging now, because it's great to reimagine, but what are we actually going to build, and what are we actually going to do? And what I found in many of these cultures across the world, from New Zealand to Peru to Botswana, was there were some incredible anchors that you would find in local communities and with local people. And And I just thought many of those things were the uniquely human things that we keep talking about, but we are really bad at articulating. So, and it could have just been it could be something so simple, like, I remember in Peru where we went into a woman's group, and we were just there as observers. We were there very much, and our motto was to tread lightly, and we always had what we called host city specialists with us. So we never went to a country without a host city team or a host city specialist who would help us on those cultural norms, how to behave and do things in the right way. We wouldn't go in without that support and that specialism. And it could just be a gathering. It could just be a gathering of people and sharing thoughts and ideas and just slowing down and getting off the phone, getting off the mobile. And so I think very simple things became very powerful. And, in Botswana, that was part of the beauty, was just every night we sat around the fire and we told stories. And imagine that. Imagine getting to know your students and your fellow staff members, your fellow team members, just sat around by a fire, sharing about what motivates you. And, like we're doing now, sharing stories, what are our passions, what are our purpose. And that was it. I think it was the beauty of simplicity.
Beautiful. I resonate so deeply with a lot of what you said, and that learning didn't just happen in a single moment. It was a culmination of things. It was the storytelling around a fire. It was, the navigating a new context, and what you listed in your book around what AI will not replace. And, if you put cultural intelligence as a key component of that, to say that we can feed AI with so much about how a certain culture is or what the norms might be. And you had a host with you. I'd love to, ask you, how much of, these elements are you seeing in learning today? Like, how much have we stripped our learning systems away from the storytelling, from the contextual awareness? Like, is it there? Is it not? Because when we design learning environments, it sounds like some of those practices, those rituals, are really conducive to kind of getting things to stick and to being inspired. But in learning systems today, what is not there that you think absolutely needs to be reintroduced, that you've learned from these indigenous communities?
I think there's an authenticity around a lot of these communities that we don't have. If I look at schooling now and learning now, we're not there. And I think, and again, I cite kind of what I talk about in terms of that thread of thought in chapter 2, again, the idea that a lot of it is theatre. And I think we've become very addicted to theatre and performance. Some of the loudest voices on LinkedIn who talk about disruption and change are going back to a traditional classroom and handing out detentions and operating by a bell, and I do feel, as I'm getting older, I do feel that kind of, I think you have to be careful, of course, and you have to be conscious in what you're doing. But at some point, I think you've got to make a radical kind of strategic or chess move. I mean, mine was a bit extreme. Getting onto a flight your whole life is not doing that. But what I am saying is, I think we do need some mindful kind of radical moves within education, because I think there's a lot of bluster, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of performance. And like I say in the book, I compare it to as you'll know, I compare it to the professional wrestling term of kayfabe, where everyone knows it's performance, everyone knows it's an act, but we're totally engaged in it, and no one breaks character. And there is a reason for that. We don't want to get fired. We don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to necessarily break a system that kind of does work. Education has been brilliant at doing what it does. And I think that's the mistake that we make in education and learning. The way learning has been set up through the education system, it does what it's meant to do, which is prepare young people for a final exam with a bit of coursework thrown in, where, in a few areas of learning. So therefore, when people talk about learning and education not working, it's not working in certain areas, but actually for what it's built to do, it kind of does work.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to kind of understand the performance and the theatre production we're in before we begin to kind of flip table. And I think going not completely, but going somewhat native for me and learning in all different environments around the world allowed me to kind of pull back the curtain and strip back the kind of fluff and say, okay, what is learning about? And there is a magic when you sit in some of these classrooms and around the fireside, and there's a beauty. And I think it comes down to storytelling. I think I always come back to that. I think, it's telling stories. It's understanding where we are in the world. And I'm not, and what we do now, we're not arguing against hard skills. Hard skills are needed. Hard skills are there. And I think we did a brilliant job at weaving these in to the portfolio-based approach. But also we've got to create room, as I found in the Sacred Valley, as I found in the Okavango Delta, of this authenticity, of this purpose, and this passion around what we learn and what we're involved in.
Yeah, beautiful. I love what you said, and it really reflects a approach to learning that we love to take also for learning within the world of work. We love the 70-20-10 model. The 70, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but for those of us in the audience who might not be, for learning to take place, 70% comes from the experience, the end-to-end experience. 20% of learning comes from the people with you. So learning, social learning from those of you who are around you. And only 10% comes from the theory. And we really strive to design our learning experiences with that in mind, because we really see how surprise broadens the mind. And unfortunately, when you enter the workforce after a K through 12 or university education, learning is typically limited to a 1 or 2 day offsite that you might be, if you're nominated for. In Dubai, it could take place in a hotel room that has, like a hotel conference room that has very tacky carpets and LED lights. Not really the most inspiring of learning experiences. But one thing that really stands out to me is this need to kind of rethink how we approach learning. And I think, you had a few examples in your book about how learning in the workforce is no different. It also requires us to rethink it. What are some of the key trends that you're seeing AI has changed in how we learn in the workplace?
Speed. I think we can learn faster now. We can condense information much quicker. You could take a 100-page report and pull out an executive summary or key bullet points. And not just that, you can tailor it, key areas in a certain domain. How does this report focus on, human flourishing? Or how does this report focus on learning? Or how does this report not, take into account of X, Y, Z? So I think I think it's speed now. And I do talk about this in the book, the idea that things are happening so much quicker now. And I think we've got to get our heads around that. The speed of learning can take place really quickly now. Does that mean we can still sit back and take our time to reflect and absorb and put these ideas into practice? Yes, of course. But we can understand a lot of the theory, a lot of the reporting, the case studies, the research now, and we can get really dynamic with how we interact and exchange ideas with that information. So I feel that I feel it's speed. I feel it's really, there's a lot around speed. And I think then in that we can then explore these uniquely human things like curiosity and creativity. So I'm seeing that AI, and I give you an example. I mean, when you think now, for those of you listening to this, when AI goes down or when AI is not working, like it happened for me like 2 weeks ago, one of the systems I use just stopped working. And you're like, oh goodness, that's a change. I'm gonna have to go back onto Google and do a Google search, or and I'm not even focusing now on over dependency. I'm just focusing on flow and workflow. It's a very disruptive now. If it's not there, it feels a bit uncomfortable, which tells me that it has been integrated now into our workflow and how we learn. Because you think some of the false dawns we've had over the past, like VR was going to change how we did all sorts of things, but it didn't really happen. If VR and our accessibility to our headset disappeared, it wouldn't really affect how we live and breathe and operate. So that didn't have the disruptive effect that we thought it would. However, my gut is that if AI disappeared tomorrow, there would be within our workflow a really significant disruption, which I think then hints that it has become part of how we do things.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I mean, when anything down, our team is like, is ChatGPT down, guys? What's happening? And you call this the collapse of time. Could you tell me what are today's learning cycles? Like, how long are they? What do you envision them to be?
Well, the classic one is the 4-year degree, isn't it, if you're in the US, and the 3-year degree if you're in more European and the UK. And I think that, for me, is going to come under extreme stress. I really do. I don't think it's happened yet, but if I was to start reading the tea leaves, and in my studio right now, we do a lot of signal scanning, and we absorb the signals around the globe happening right now. I think you might, not in all domains. I think some domains you probably will, the collapse of time won't happen in such an extreme way, but in other domains, I don't know if you're going to be able to justify, and here's just the provocations for your audience. I'm not sure we'll be able to justify a 3 or 4 year degree for much longer. So that could be one learning cycle. I think in most companies, I'm 46, so the idea is you would spend when I grew up, there was a certain amount of time you had to kind of earn your stripes, and you had to be lower on the ladder and work your way up. I think that collapse of time is happening now. We're seeing basically fresh graduates design and build in their bedrooms. And I remember this in the music world, when you had people making music in their bedrooms. I think Calvin Harris being a prime example. I think his whole album was made in his bedroom. So we saw that in the music industry, and that's now coming to business with the idea that we can code through Claude, ChatGPT. Gemini 3 obviously was a huge game changer in the last 2 weeks. So I think now we are seeing business is being built, and that access has been given to young people, which it wasn't before, not to this extreme length. So I think that time has collapsed pretty significantly in terms of business building, business creation, and we already see it. Look at some of the first companies that have emerged in the last 12 months. They're largely created by young entrepreneurs, fresh graduates who have got an idea or an itch, and they're looking to solve that quickly through a lot of AI tools.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think it's so true. We have so much that we have access to in order to build, in order to innovate, in order to create in such a rapid cycle. I agree, definitely question marks on the 4 to 3 year university degrees. In the workplace, I'm curious, what are some of the learning cycles? Have you observed any learning cycles from a time frame perspective? I know you talk about the 6-month Firefly cycle. Does that apply to the world of work? And if not, in work, we're learning at rapid speeds. How would you design a learning cycle in the workplace? What kind of time frame would you give?
Yeah, I think we have to, and I think that's already been. So I'll give you a classic norm from the workplace. Is the annual review. And for pretty much most workplaces will have an annual review, and it's actually weird. More companies and more organizations haven't tried to reimagine and then rebuild that. But if you go into education, if you go into finance, if you go into IT, most will have an annual review. And what happens? You sit with your line manager, you discuss your performance, some obscure metrics. You either get a pat on the back or a kick up the backside, and that goes into a drawer. No one looks at it again, and then a year later you go back to it. So I think annual review is the classic workplace. And again, we could get so much more creative with that, and so much, we could do so much more there now with the tools that we have. And I think instead of, I talk about the 6-month sprint and the levels of ownership in the book, and all this now can be integrated. So what I argue in the book is now, for many companies, we can embed we can allow our employees to build and design and innovate. And what I talk about in the Firefly Effect is some of the best, and I don't know if you describe it as best, but some of the most interesting creations that we interact with on a daily basis were created by people who went rogue and did a design sprint of their own inside of a company in which they probably should have been fired for. So I talk about Dina Campion in Starbucks, who created the Frappuccino and was told no one would want that. I talk about the fillet of fish, the idea that actually in McDonald's, the idea that people were coming in on a Friday and they're like, oh, I can't eat meat. So what happened was a guy called Lou Groen designed the fillet of fish, and actually Ray Koch didn't want, the owner of McDonald's, he didn't want it. He actually wanted a pineapple burger called the Hula Burger, and that sold 1 to every 300 fillet of fish. So fillet of fish then took off, and obviously, I don't know, these feel like obscure things, but all of them represent multi-million or even billion-dollar parts of a company now. The PlayStation was again, it was a rogue project in and around a sound card, which then became a gaming station that Sony said we don't do games in the 80s, and one of the engineers went rogue and ended up designing the PlayStation. So what I'm saying is, if we allow carefully and considerately, if we allow our talent to be creative in the realms of work, actually you can get some incredible results. And the bottom line now is, if you don't let people do that, they'll probably go off and either create their own company or go somewhere where they're allowed more creativity, because the options now are so much greater than when I graduated, where there was about 4 or 5 different work streams. It was be a teacher, it was go into finance, it was be a lawyer, doctor. It was pretty limited, whereas now it's in terms of work direction, it's endless in what you can do.
Beautiful. I love so much of what you're saying. This idea of introducing project-based experimentation into the world of work in order to inspire employees to innovate and to create, really just so interesting. I know some of the work of, there's a school out in Cambridge called Nouveau Schools, and the founder was an MIT graduate, and he came from the MIT Media Lab, where learning is project-based. I love this idea that we can learn by doing, and we integrate this a lot into our learning programs as well. We love when we have the opportunity to have a learning program result in an actual deliverable that enables, the employees who we're training and the learners to progress in their work, to create something, to produce and apply learnings all throughout that project. I think that rethinking how we design training to be maybe learning through experimentation or is really, really interesting. One thing I'll add to that I love is the Amy Edmondson, Harvard professor. She's really renowned for making psychological safety as a concept to be very popular. She invites us to reckon with what she calls this idea of thinking like a scientist. A scientist goes into an experiment with one of 2 outcomes, and both give you data, both give you insight. Learning from failure is super important. And when you're a scientist in the laboratory, you have an hypothesis and you test it. And even if it doesn't result in the outcome you're hoping for, it gives you new learning and insight. And so to say that it's not a failure, it's just, another iteration of a learning cycle. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe some of the interesting work you've done, maybe through Almach AI, or along the way, even with some students, about how you design moments for innovation through learning, and what can we, and those of us who are in learning design in the workforce, take away from those experiences or examples that you might share?
I heard something from an ex-colleague of mine, which was really powerful. And he used to say, don't let perfects get in the way of good. And I think education, and I think I see this a lot in low trust environments, where I think people need to present perfect or they feel vulnerable. And I think it's extremely damaging, because if you're striving to hand your line manager, or in education, your teacher, something perfect, that's extremely difficult. And I think what we were really good at Think Global School is we were really good at iterating, and we were really good. Obviously, we wanted to create excellent and outstanding work, but we operated with something called the ugly duckling, syndrome. We weren't afraid to get that ugly, dirty prototype out there and then begin to work on it. And I think we were very, another thing we used to say often is hard on the content, kind on the person. So you never made it personal. So when something was shared in a team, a first prototype, it wasn't, what were you thinking? How did you design this? It was, okay, we've got something here. Let's create a community around it and give that hard feedback on the content, but never make it personal. And in taking little steps like that, we allowed people to take risks. And it wasn't always perfect. Some people were better at it than others. But in creating a community where you were allowed to create that kind of dirty prototype and get it in there, and people then kind of give an opinion on it, give feedback on it, we were able to move quickly to second, third, fourth iteration. And I think that was really powerful for us. And because we were based around a portfolio, not an exam, that was incredibly powerful. Now, this was a fully accredited high school. My students ended up going to the best universities in the world. Because we were running a portfolio system, not a terminal exam system, the kind of the ugly duckling prototype, they were part of the portfolio. So you were in your first and second prototypes, you would then reflecting on it within the portfolio, you're getting feedback from mentors. So everything was set up to really design at speed, design at pace. We were only in countries for 8 weeks, so we had to move fairly quickly to get ready for that showcase where mum and dad would fly in and would get our mentors from the local community to come and view what the students had built to create, to address a real world problem. So I think it's, again, we go back to how we started the conversation, simplicity. If you create a community that is open to sharing, that doesn't feel vulnerable, that feels valued, you can then move at pace. Something I did as director and principal of Think Global School, I ran the school off very simple principles. We didn't have endless rules. I actually ran the school, and I went all around the world with my students. I never had to expel a student. They were pretty much, for 16 to 18-year-olds, pretty perfectly behaved, because we kept rules really simple for them. It was, don't be an idiot. And when someone speaks, listen. It was really simple stuff. Again, stripping things down to that first principle, those basic good manners and that basic good, decent behavior, then allowed us to do all the more complex things when we were kind of trying in Oman to build a boat powered by Bluetooth, which was a whole different story. And that was one that that was a project that was way more complicated than it sounded. But having very simple community kind of, not rules or laws, but just guiding principles, allowed everything else to function and then get more complex.
Beautiful. A few things, maybe I want to kind of recap for those of us in learning design. I heard some remarkable takeaways. I think the first one is, we talked about it, is to look at learning as an experience and to also look at learning through application, maybe through project-based moments. Also, having the right attitude to risk and failure is super important, to say that we cannot be allergic to failure. And the beautiful example that you shared of actually showcasing works in progress or failed attempts as part of the iteration that got you to the end result. I think that's so nice, to say that, like, where did you trip up in the process? What did that look like? And what did you learn from that led to a more positive outcome? I think that really stands out as something that, like, it's just so interesting in how we design showcases and different moments when we can see how people learn and learn out loud together. We talked a lot about...
I'll give you a quick example of that. Like something really,
I love that. Please.
Something really personal. So when we built Almach AI, at the core of Almach is a kind of galaxy UX. And as you address certain competencies in learning, the galaxy kind of triggers and fires up. And we're over a year in designing this, thousands and thousands of lines of code. And we actually have still in our kind of internal community ecosystem, the very first image where we started, which was a board that was very linear, which followed a path, and it just lit up. And we took that and we said, could we do something in and around learning where what we learn kind of lights up and showcase? And that first prototype, we often look at it as a team and kind of, we chuckle together and go, this is where all this started. And it does feel ridiculous that we looked at that 14, 15, 16 months ago and thought that, and we never thought that it could be a final product, but we certainly didn't think that we would be where we are now with the infrastructure we have. But to all your learning designers listening, you have to start somewhere. And I guarantee in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, you will look back and it's very rare you won't be embarrassed where you started. You'll just laugh and go, oh, wow, we started there. Like, can you believe it?
It's a beautiful ritual, and I think it's one that invites learning throughout the organizational experience, not limited to a training, to say that, like, if you regularly look back at earlier work, earlier iterations, and talk out loud about what you can learn from them, you can inspire learning within your, amongst your employees where they learn from each other. We also love to do it at Cosmic. We bring up old work, and I'm always the first to be like, this was pre-chat GPT work, I'll have you guys know. But it just kind of is a testament to then, like, what we did it's like a pre and post. I want to kind of shift the conversation because we talked a lot about, well, how is learning broadly changed? But I want to talk about, well, what are those skills that we want to now focus on? You outline this, there are certain skills that we can outsource to the machine. So what capabilities and skills should leaders double down on that do make them uniquely human? What should we be focusing on when it comes to what we train our workforce on that won't be taken over by the machine?
Well, I think I'm on two very different sides of the spectrum here. And we talk a lot about this with our engineering team at Almach. And obviously I have incredible engineers that are building this. And we talk a lot about that question. And I think we still need hard skills. We still need, there are core things within physics, within mathematics, that we just simply need, and I think they're good to know. Now, do schools go a bit over the OTT with these or silo them too much? Absolutely. But I think often people think, especially when it comes to things like project-based learning, they think it's all or nothing on the project-based learning. It's not. We never built 100% PBL school. It wasn't. It was a 60-40 school where the other 40 was more around hard skills, wellness, advisory. So I think what we will need as we move forward is we're still going to need, and we still have to be careful with this in any industry. You're still going to have to master, I think, a core. As a I have a history background, so the idea there's still core skills a historian needs. Like I'm still going, and this is very good for AI. I need to spot bad sources. I need to spot when a source doesn't look right, and no, because AI is terrible at making up sources, and just because AI is always trying to please you,
Sure.
You'll throw in and you'll check, and we train our teams on this a lot, like double and triple check any stat or source it gives you. You find out often that they're actually not correct. So I think as a historian, and I remember learning that at 16, like check your sources. That core skill, that guiding principle hasn't changed for me for 30 years. But then the other side of the spectrum is, okay, then once you get through the kind of then work that AI can guide you with, then I think, and I think this is quite a saturated conversation now, which I think does need to move into phase 2 or 3, is the idea of passion, purpose, curiosity, collaboration, critical thinking. Like critical thinking kind of annoys me. We talk so much about it, but we never, it's kind of like the, nailing the jellyfish to a wall. We never quite pin it down. Like, what is it? And I'm not saying we have to measure everything, but I think we can get a little better at describing things and help anchor and ground things. And I think sometimes we have to be a little careful not to overly sound like an overpaid consultant who are throwing around what my friend calls the bumper stickers, and I don't want things like curiosity, passion, purpose, critical thinking to become bumper stickers that don't mean much. So I think we have an obligation now If we are saying as a learning community, as a design community, that these are the skills we want to see in our talent and our young people, then I think we need to do a deeper dive in what do these mean within our ecosystem, within our projects, within our design cycles. Like what, because I could show critical thinking in one project, but I might show very limited critical thinking in another. We also make this mistake. We've gone through we use all these AI tools, and then we outline certain skills that we think are going to be, as you rightly said, part of this post-AI world, really valuable. But then we treat them as skills that we had pre-AI, which is very linear. They're very, again, I might be curious about one topic, but absolutely apathetic about another. I think we talk about them like, oh, this student is really curious. Well, curious here, but maybe not there.
Sure. Yeah.
This mistake happen all the time in adult learning, in companies, in organizations. Like we've got a real great culture on critical thinking. Everything. So I think we've got an obligation to make it a little clear. Yeah. Like in this domain, my team are really curious, but in this domain, actually, and that can be good. That can be really good to understand. But these are not just blanket terms you throw around. Like I think we have to go a lot deeper in them.
Yeah, definitely agree that I think when we're giving feedback or when we're evaluating performance, to have those objective moments when we can say, here you exercised analytical thinking consultant. And in this project, we didn't see it as much. Let's talk about why. What was it? There was some of the elements you talked about that you want to keep and not kill when it came to skills that we can continue to hone and build, particularly in the workforce that emerged. I love the phrasing of them. The first one was wisdom and discernment. I think that was so nice, and also came from this idea that like to carry knowledge, through generations, through layers of the organization, is that wisdom to kind of maintain it. You talked about emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, which we touched on earlier. And then this phrasing you had was beautiful. It said sacred relationships. And I really loved it because the example was that of a leader and a learner, to say that there are sacred relationships that we as managers and leaders have with those who we work with, or an apprentice and somebody that they train. Like these are so important, and AI cannot take that from us. That is where this idea of us being IRL really matters, because what we gain from a teacher that changed our life, I think we all have it, unlikely teachers that really shape, and have a very formative effect on our journey. And then the last one was storytelling. And I loved all of these. I love the phrasing of them. I thought that they really stood out as really core, almost leadership capabilities that people need in order to carry us forward, especially as we go through uncertainty. So maybe just kind of, if that's what we're going to keep and focus on, and like you're saying, thinking intentionally about, when we see them, to say that we won't always see them, but we'll see them in certain instances. What are the areas that, we can accept that, yes, AI is going to take these technical skills, these strong skills, and what mistakes do you see organizations making? It's a question we have from the audience. When they bring AI into learning, is it because they focus on those skills, or is the mistake that, they're using them in the wrong way? Like, where do organizations and leaders trip up when it comes to building the skills that matter and using AI for them?
Yeah, I said in an article I wrote, and I posted it on LinkedIn a few days ago, I talked a little bit about the Australian blanket ban on social media. And I don't know, there was just something about it where I thought, what a absolute failure from the adults to actually, to actually say, okay, we've really not taught this because bad use of anything. If I give you a chain, if I give 16-year-old Tala a chainsaw and say, go and have fun, you probably will make a mistake or two, and your family won't be too thrilled about.
No, they wouldn't. Yes.
So I think if we give bad tools to people and we don't educate on bad tools, it's not necessarily a phone or social media, that's anything. So I just thought it was a really bad indictment about how we how we've absolutely failed to actually coach,
Mm.
train, mentor, advise on this technology. And what I would say to your audience member who asked about that is, we host an event in Japan where every year we get together 50 people from around the world who are invested, interested, passionate about learning. And we gather in the Japanese Alps and we spend 3 days really off the grid, really diving deep. And we were joined by, last year, we were joined by a gentleman called Dr. Odeh, who was very senior at Sony in the 1980s. And actually, remember the little white dog that I think it's called Aribo, and it was a little white robotic dog that Sony built. Dr. Odeh was the creator of that. So he was a brilliant man, a phenomenal engineer. And
Yes. The robot.
Yeah. We didn't actually know. Yeah. And it's obviously into retirement now, enjoying life, but he joined us for a conversation around AI. So we were in the presence of really an incredible engineer, an incredible mind. And what he said always has lived with me since. And he said very bluntly, if we don't understand the ethics and morality around this technology, we've got no business using it. So to your audience member who asked that question, I think, what am I seeing organizations getting wrong is we're not having conversations about the ethics and morality of use of AI. How do we want and we're not, we're great at putting 5 or 10 year plans in that we'll never actually do. Let's be honest, the 5 year and 10 year plan is pretty obsolete now. But what I've hardly ever see people do is, how are we using it right now? What are we doing today? Because that understanding the now is so important, but I so rarely see organizations doing it. They'll devise a 5 year plan before even understanding what is the user case studies happening at this very moment with AI. I was using it, to give you an example, I was using it at the gym this morning. I was like, I've done this, this, and this. What should the next 2 exercises be? So I've been just the idea, because I've never enjoyed, I've trained all my life pretty much, because I played a lot of sports as a much younger human. But I never enjoyed necessarily training because I was a cricket player. So I really enjoyed the coaching and the advisory with the coach in cricket, but I never enjoyed training with someone. So AI has been great for me. So I use it as a kind of, but again, so that's very much a personal, I'm not going out there advising people to use it like that. That's just really been cool for me to do. But again, so we're not doing storytelling anywhere near as much for the here and now. We're constantly still obsessing about 5, 10 year plans. And what I say in the book is, imagine having a 5 year plan in 2019. It would be so obsolete now. It would be insane. You've had the pandemic, you've had virtual learning, you've had AI, then you've had, many more iterations of AI. You've had education being tipped on its head. So I think as well, not saying don't do them, but I'm just saying that understand what people are doing today. That's so important.
Amazing. And, for employees and for the learners that we work with, what's a habit or practice that helps them to stay adaptive and kind of using AI, using these tools, as you say, to drive their own learning and growth? Are there rituals that you've seen that have worked really well? You called on AI in the gym. If you were, working in organization XYZ, what are some of the ways that you think that we can use AI to continuously learn in the workplace beyond the predictable tasks of, let's say, research and administration and using ChatGPT to write emails, et cetera? But is there a cool use case of how we can use it as a tool to learn and further our capability in the area that we're working in?
Again, keeping it super simple. I think there are far more complicated ways to do this, which we could go through, but then no one could use. But I think something really simple I've seen work is just in the morning ritual for teams that do a huddle or just get together very quickly for a 5 minute, just how we're feeling today, what's on the agenda, and then just give someone the floor for 3 minutes. What we do in Hakuba is we do something called frontier talks, and we obviously only have 3 days together. But if I was with a team full time, you could really stretch this out. And no slides, there's nothing visual created. Someone just stands up for 3 minutes and talks about a frontier they are pushing in their company, in their industry. So I've seen that as a beautiful ritual. And again, you could just run it through the lens of AI. Like in your morning ritual, who is pushing a frontier using AI? It doesn't need. I think we overcomplicate stuff so much, and then when it gets to a point of complication, we tend to back away from it and not do it. So the frontier talk idea I've seen work really nicely at Hakuba, and we brought that into a few of our partner collaborations, and it works nicely.
Yeah, I love this premise of simplicity, to say that like we can look at AI as this beast that is, incomprehensible and will absolutely change things. But if you strip it down to its basic, what are the small things we can do? What are the ways in which we can integrate it? What can we focus on that we can double down on in terms of skills, and what will we no longer do? Like, to just this framing is quite liberating, actually. It makes it not feel like we're climbing a really massive mountain. I hate to kind of say it, but we are nearing the end of our conversation. And as with all our guests, we love to ask a series of rapid fire questions. And these are designed just to be kind of quick, one word answer, complete the sentence, but hopefully kind of close us out on a nice energizer. And so if you're ready, Russell, I'm ready to ask you my 3 rapid fire questions.
Sure, go for it.
Awesome. So what is one misconception about AI that you wish every leader would move past?
Going to need more than one word, that one. There's so many misconceptions. One misconception around AI, that it's all or nothing. I think we've lost nuance, and I think it's either you're all in or you're all out, and I don't think it needs to be like that.
Yeah, beautiful. What is the leadership quality most important to succeed in the era of AI?
I think the whole thread through this conversation is simplicity. Leadership needs to focus on the important things and keep things simple.
Yeah. And besides the Firefly Effect, what is the best resource, podcast, or article for anyone who's looking to navigate how AI is changing how we learn and how we work?
Oh, I think it was. It was right here the other day. Is it Matt? I don't know how it was. Life 3.0. I found that. Is it Max Tegert? I've read that book a few years back, and that was one of my first real forays into futures in that densely. And it was. I really liked that as a book and as a resource. I've dipped back into that a few times since. It was there. I've moved it though.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, it's actually great. Jay from the audience, hi Jay, asks a question: what are the top 3 credible resources for AI in general that are worth investing time into to upskill yourself? So our team will drop the link to Life 3.0 by Tegmark, and maybe some others. Russell, you can come back and answer. I'm really grateful for this conversation today, and I'm just very I learned a lot. I learned out loud. I think the Firefly Effect has been a really invaluable resource. What I loved about it is that it has so many frameworks, so many reflection prompts. And like I was saying, this is my husband's copy, so I didn't, write all over it, but it was really, really great. So thank you for publishing this, and I encourage anyone to go out and learn from this. One of the lasting thoughts that I had with this, and that really stuck with me when I was going through it, is this idea that you have an anecdote of a moment in the future where a world-renowned cardiac surgeon has an apprentice, and their apprentice has just learned that AI can take over 100% of their job and perform surgeries better. And that, former retired surgeon says to him, what I can focus on teaching you is how to tell a patient and walk them through how they're going to go and navigate through this uncertainty of heart surgery, or what the consequences are. And it was just such a beautiful closing thought on how what remains and what's uniquely human are those elements of emotional intelligence, coaching, storytelling, wisdom, drawing from the University of Experience. And I think a lot of that came up in our conversation today. So with that, I just want to thank you and thank our audience. If anybody is interested in learning more, We are going to be posting this as an article and as a podcast, so you can definitely come back and revisit it. We are also in the new year hosting a workshop on systems thinking in action. Actually, I think what's lovely about this is AI is a system breaker, and we're going to be going through how leaders can practice systems thinking in action in a virtual workshop on January 20th at 8:30 p.m. UAE time. So our team will drop the link to register. And with that, thank you. I wish everybody a happy holiday season and a new year. And Russell, thank you again. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Great to join you.
Thank you. Yeah, of course.